Okay, so first one up is off Twitter, posted by a news agency. Now, I loved this visual for two main reasons. One is the idea of this kind of idea of clockwork. You're going years, albeit they are going anti-clockwise in the years, but also to highlight that the athletes that have won the most consecutive gold medals, either four or more, is actually such a small portion. Now, for some reason in my mind, I expected there to actually be a number of athletes that had probably achieved that, especially in certain domains where you have a bit more longevity to your sport. But I liked it. I thought that was really clear. I like the idea of the consecutiveness, easily identified with the line between the different dots, and I can easily add up, the 4 or 5 dots on the page. Now, this was released when the Cuban wrestler had achieved this feat during the most recent Olympics. And so it actually made me go down and dive a little bit more into the story behind it, because I thought I'm surprised it wasn't of bigger note in the past. So really loved the story and loved the way it was presented on the page.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's two little design tweaks that I love about it. One is that they've got just athletes sharing the same radius around the circle where they don't overlap. Just really clever way of saving space. You don't confuse them in your head because they're all labeled separately. But like Paul Elvstrom, Carl Lewis, and Kaori Icho are all on the same radius. So that, otherwise they would look like the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like you said, CJ, the fact that it's anti-clockwise means that for me, the way sort of as a Western reader, I start at that Cuban guy's 5th gold medal as the highlight point, and then come to the beginning and read it in an anti-clockwise fashion to kind of understand more about it. And I think that really backs up what you said around that was what inspired it. That's the point of it, is to celebrate that. And so by constructing it the way they have, that becomes the most important dot. And then you build the rest of the viz, the rest of the narrative back from there.
Mm.
I think also, Mo, it's the only one that's got the data label in it as well, the number 5. So again, you're attracted to that because it's the only thing that's different about all the dots compared with everything else. So yeah, it's really interesting. I was thinking when I saw this that a little bit like CJ, there's got to be more dots. There's got to be more people that have won more medals consecutively. I think there must be a lot of athletes that have won 3 in a row. And I do wonder, we got into this debate, didn't we, on Twitter between us all. I do wonder whether they're maybe classifying the events and being a little bit too specific on the exact event, because I'm sure there's athletes that have gone cross-discipline or cross-event that have won more than 4 in a row. But Steve Redgrave comes to mind as potentially one that did that. But yeah, it's a great viz. I really enjoyed looking at it. And I just wonder, this Cuban wrestler, he was what, 25 when he won his first gold medal, all the way to 41. So what an incredible career.
Yeah. And didn't he he did something of note to kind of like hanging up the boots per se, of like, I'm retiring from it. I thought during the Olympic Games he had left his part of his shoes on the mat or something like that. Is
that's really cool.
He lifted up his trainer, didn't he? I know he did that.
That was amazing when he threw his trainer, because his trainer, like his coach, is also like a tiny little man. And they ran towards him, and he just gently went, "Ooh!" and dumped him on the surface. Brilliant.
Oh, amazing. What a great feat. The second one I picked is from Lev. Now, there's multiple reasons I like this chart, mainly because of the stories that kind of sit behind these points. Now, I quite like that it's a truncated axis, simply because if you had this between 0 and 10, you wouldn't be able to see the separation. And when we're talking about fine margins of tenths of seconds, you really need it spread out. Now, there's a few stories for me within this. There's, of course, the color highlighting. So we're talking about Bolt within it, we're talking about Lyles. And then there's the kind of the message behind people talking about it being the best 100 meters race at the Olympics. Now, it's up for debate because, yes, it's the first sub 10 seconds, which we can easily read across this chart, for all the finalists to do sub 10. but is it my favorite ever 100 meters? And is it best in my eyes? I would say that gap of comparison of Bolt setting those records versus what is still a very strong field during his years. For me, that was the excitement. Another thing I love about this visual is, of course, you can see the general trend of people improving. We probably would expect that, and records to be broken over time. Now, I'd love to know who this was. I don't know off the top of my head, but, you know, one of those first sub-10s must have been an incredible moment as well. And I love that, you know, the following Olympics, there wasn't, because I can imagine that feeling was probably a fairly similar feeling to Bolt doing a sub 9.6.
Yeah, when you got views like this, there's so many stories. Even as you were talking, CJ, and I was listening to you, I promise. But even when you were talking, you can still pull out other stories. 1980, for example, what's happened there? I mean, obviously the scale is squashed, but it just looks like everyone's crawling towards the line there, and compare with years either side. So yeah, it is fantastic, and I wonder whether people think that it was the greatest race purely because if you look at the clumping together of those dots, they're so tightly packed in, much more than any other race. It just shows that everyone crossed the line pretty much at the same point, and it could really have been anyone that won. But it also makes me think, I wonder if we were a little bit blasé at the time about Bolt and how good he was. When you look at that 9.58, 9.59, was it? And you think, oh, okay, that's good. That's a world record at the time. But it really does show now just how good it was and how it's going to be a challenge to top it, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you look at those two fastest times by Bolt, the guy who came in second would have run the two fastest 100-meter times had it not been for Usain Bolt. Like a real, what else is he supposed to do? And yeah, he still got absolutely blitzed. I love this. I think this is great. There's so much in there. But I think mostly I love the story of Noah Lyles. Like the comeback in that race was ridiculous, but also like he's the fastest man because that title goes with the person who wins the 100 meters at the Olympics. That's how that works, and that's fine. But he's clearly not the fastest man. Like I love it. I just love everything about him and this sport and what it's for and the characters, and this graph just does all of that for me.
Who is the fastest man then, Mo? When you say he's clearly not,
I think he's the fastest man running at the moment.
Okay.
But just like if you look back through time, like it's obviously not as fast as Usain Bolt, but there have been handfuls of athletes who have like consistently run a bit faster than he currently does.
The third visual I picked was this one by Will Sutton. Now, this was a very popular data set amongst the community during the Olympics, the idea of, how old are some of the Olympians. Now, I love this view because of a number of reasons, but this stuck out to me because of the act of comparison. So we have a minimum and maximum number for each of the different disciplines. We can easily compare those going across the disciplines. So the horizontal, you can pull out really quick and easy stories based on, who has the widest age range, who is the youngest, who has the oldest. Skateboarding sticks out to me. Equestrian definitely sticks out to me. Those two probably wouldn't be of shock to people necessarily, but also we can see, we can generally find out where people sit across all disciplines, which I think is a nice judge of comparison as well. But also we have the female versus male. So interestingly enough, for me, the one that sticks out is the football, actually.
Yeah, that football is really interesting, really reflecting the different nature of the professionalization of the men's and the women's game and how they compete at the Olympics or not. But yeah, I think that's really interesting. And also modern pent stuck out to me because so in a lot of these sports, you see this kind of characteristic gapping, and it's often related, I think, to like school years or Olympic cycles. So it's kind of every 2 to 4 years you see these peaks of athlete ages, and it's obviously because it just coincides with their development and the Olympic cycle. That's kind of how it goes. But for modern Pent, they're offset. You've got this massive gap down the middle of both the men's and the women's where something happened. I don't know if maybe there was a games where it wasn't on, or like something weird occurred and we missed a generation of athletes on both sides, but it's not at the same time. And I just think that's really, really interesting.
I wonder when the women's football will mirror itself to the men's and say that we've got Euros, we've got World Cups, we've got same sort of tournaments that you have, and actually we should be presenting under 23 versions of the teams as well as the male version perhaps. But the other one that caught my eye was the skateboarding. So CJ, you mentioned it, and I think it's quite funny that you've got obviously a wide range of ages. But as it gets towards the older ranges, it's the men sort of can't let go of their youth, still carrying on with people in their 50s and still knocking out the old skateboard in there. It's quite amusing.
Right, it's that British guy, wasn't it? Andy.
Yeah,
McDonald?
but there's a few. If you look, I mean, I can't really quite see where that would be, but certainly if you look at where the women drop off, must be around the 20-ish, 25-ish range. There's still a fair few men all the way through to, I think, that Andy guy, like you say, Mo.
And interestingly enough, I think at the Olympics, most, if not all, the disciplines, the rule sets are the same for both male and female, right? So, take tennis. By nature, men used to play 5 sets. Females would play 3, but I think in the Olympics they play the same number of sets, right? So the only differences to me that would stick out is gymnastics. There's certain events that females will do versus males, which of course you can see, swimming and gymnastics on this chart very easily. But it's interesting that whilst actually the disciplines mirror each other at the Olympics for male and female, we do get those standouts in age categories.
And it's even more peculiar that it's only happened in skateboarding and not in any of the other like more modern lifestyle sports, so surfing, BMX, freestyle, stuff like that, where actually the populations mirror each other pretty well.
Yeah, good point. Okay, on to me and my collection then. So I chose this one. First of all, it's one of my favorite races at the Olympics, the 400 meters. One of the other memorable aspects of it was the commentary in the UK was very much around Hudson Smith and how he was pretty much he was the world's fastest runner at the time, certainly that year, and how he's pretty much guaranteed to win gold medal. So when it all began, the 400 meters kicked off, he was doing very well, as you can see from this chart here by Damilola. He got to the front and it was going very much expected to plan until we got to, it was about 50 meters from the end when this guy, Quincy Hall, came back in and took the win at the end. And I think this brilliantly demonstrates how the fluctuations of that race, but how this guy was just not thought about at all during the race, even until the last closing meters. And it's only really when he overtook Hudson Smith, people thought, well, hang on a minute, this guy's going to win and Hudson Smith isn't going to get what everyone thought he would get. And I think the simplicity of this, the ribbon effect, the flow of it is just beautifully done. So from a rank chart perspective, I think this is a really good one. We saw a few for the 100 meters, but I thought I'd pick this one out to represent the 400 meters.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to say this would be called like a ribbon chart, wouldn't it? But we had like a bump chart or the rank charts, and for anything pretty much that was a track event. The 100 meters was so popular, but I think it works really well over probably 100, 200, 400, like the distances, especially where you see those kind of comeback comparisons. Design wise, for me, what stuck out was like small things like making the text slightly larger here, slightly larger here. The labeling, it's just great context for something that's quite like a printed visual. This is the main story going through here. But just like, you got the gold, silver, bronze, you got the time frames, you got it nicely framed. For me, it makes it a really cohesive piece.
Yeah, it's really nice. And I think there's something really interesting about having all of the rest of the others in the same color, because they're very easily distinguishable, but it does force you to actually go back and look at them, not just kind of half let yourself absorb it, but without actually checking, if that makes sense. if they were all different colours, you'd kind of get the gist of it, but you wouldn't necessarily actually know where each person was at each time. Whereas with this, it's really clear as long as you actually go back and just check, like, look, you can follow them really clearly, but it kind of actually almost prevents you from making a half-hearted assumption about where you think they were, which actually I really like. I don't know if that was what Demona was intending, but I think it's a great
It's
effect.
a classic, yeah, it's a good example, isn't it, Mo, of bringing one thing absolutely to the forefront, but retaining the context if you want to explore it in a little bit more detail and find out what's going on. Yeah. Okay, maps. Well, I love a map, and I thought this was, I think it might have been a Makeover Monday data set locations, or yeah, I think it's Makeover Monday locations of the Olympics, and this is one of the ones that we saw tagged from Dennis Cow. Absolutely amazing view here of the aesthetics about it. I love the zoom aspect that we've got. We've got the whole of France. We've got where that is in relation to the world in the bottom left. I like the fact it's in the bottom left because most people kind of know where France is, so it doesn't need to be front and center. But then we've got the zoomed in views of the metropolis of Paris and where all the locations are. I think from a design point of view, it just looks brilliant. It'd be something that you would easily have no second thoughts about printing out, put it on your wall, or even the Olympics venue, just putting it in within some kind of wall chart. It will work equally well there as well. What I liked about the design, though, was it really does showcase quite how widespread these venues were. I didn't really think about it from that perspective. You think they're in Paris or maybe in the outskirts of Paris, but you can see various qualifying events, some of the other events that were in very many different cities as well. So yeah, really great to see those stand out. And of course, they're all labeled brilliantly as well. So yeah, fantastic effort from Dennis.
Yeah, I've just learned about the surfing just now. So
that was a long way away.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, it's great. If you asked me where this had come from, if you just showed it to me as a screenshot with no information, I would have assumed that one of the major newspapers had done it.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly one of the things that I'm becoming really interested in is use of font, because it gives you so many cues. And one of the things I think I like about this is that the font is very evocative of like newspaper font. Mm-hmm. And I think that partly feeds into it as well. And it just, like it or lump it, I suppose, and I don't mean the viz because I love it, like it or lump it, we come to visualizations with all of these bias and experiences based on where we're used to seeing things. And generally newspapers produce really high quality vizzes. So doing something that takes cues from those design ideas can like really elevate a viz because it reminds us of high quality things that we're used to seeing. It has that high quality feel to it, that kind of extra elegance and that extra style that is just baked into the things that we're surrounded by. And I think this is such a great example of that, as well as being, like you said, a wonderful storytelling visualization.
Yeah, definitely. The other example that springs to mind when I think about these sorts of infographic style is the Doreen Kindersley, the DK books. You ever come across those? They're just laid out beautifully, and you always think, when I've done visualizations in the past, my intention has been, well, let's try and make it look and feel like that. Of course, it never comes out exactly like that at all, but you always have that aspiration. I think that some of these people like Dennis and obviously others as well are getting closer and closer to that look and feel, aren't they? Really good.
Dennis definitely really has mastered maps.
Yeah, I could put everything he makes on my wall, I think.
All right, this is my final one from Rob Taylor, and this is highlighting the career, the fantastic career of Simone Biles, the gymnast from the USA. Now, we've had a bit of a debate over this around some font selections. I think it feels like New York edge to me. So I can see why Rob's gone with the fonts there.
That's really your youthful side, Simon.
Well, yeah, mate, that's my 80s grunge. Yeah, and but what I really like about this is, one, the immediate sense of how dominant she was across a number of different areas. So if you think about this as being effectively like a radar chart in a way, where it's highlighting each year's progression of performance across the segments which represent the different events and disciplines. You can immediately see where she isn't strongest, uneven bars, not so much color in that bottom left-hand section. But then you begin to focus on, okay, if that wasn't the case for there, then really, it does demonstrate quite how dominant she was in all the other events, being these combination of yellows and oranges, which highlight the gold medals and other good performances. So for me, the color choices stand out. The fact it's in that circular design, the fact even Rob's put the medal strap, which really makes it give that sense that it is a medal hanging around someone's neck, showing that performance. There's some nice touches there, and I think some nice technical aspects as well that were put into it. So yeah, nice design, and it really does provide that view of quite how dominant and successful she's been.
I'd love to know how Rob approached this in terms of that design. Do you start with saying, okay, Simona's won so many gold medals, let's go down the medal route, and then think about how that can be created chart wise? Or is it kind of like you start looking through the medal list and saying, yeah, this could work, and then you go, okay, let's make it into a radial? It's kind of going from data to chart, or do you go from chart to data?
Chart to data, yeah. Without second guessing Rob, I'd maybe say that he's got the gold medal in mind and he's tried to fit the data within that, probably, but I might be wrong.
Yeah.
Next time, Rob, we see you, we'll ask.
Yeah.
I like it, and I like the tree ring thing. Normally we see radials where the time goes around the outside. It's nice to see a radial where time actually goes up through the rings instead. And like you said, Simon, it allows, that was the thing that stood out to me when I looked at this. I went, my God, Simone Biles is terrible at the uneven bars for an elite level gymnast who's as good as she is at everything else. Absolutely terrible. And you just don't, that message doesn't stand out if you make this graph the other way.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because it'd be mixed in with all the other good performance for each year. Yeah.
Cool. This is the first one of the ones I was looking at. So this is Kirk's visualization about traveling distance during Formula One. I picked this because I wasn't really aware of this. I knew they traveled quite a long way, but it was only actually by looking through this I realized how far they traveled, but also how far they flip-flop from one location and back again. And as I was going through this, I was thinking, would it be nice to see everything kind of overlaid so you can see all the previous journeys as well? And actually, when I looked at it more, it takes away from that flip-flop effect for me, if that's the case. I really like that this kind of looks at just where are we now, where have we come from, where are we going, as like a specific idea. And then you've just got the cumulative distance that adds on, but it's almost like each chapter is looked at on its own relative to the one before and the one after. And it creates a really kind of interesting story for me, and certainly one that made me carry on going all the way through. I really wanted to see kind of how it evolved and where they went next.
Yeah, I guess I follow F1 a little bit more maybe, and so I know that they took big steps to try and make themselves more sustainable, and one of those aspects is to reduce the traveling distance. So they have made adjustments to the calendar. So I was looking at this expecting in a way to see some quite small arrows, but really when you get into it and you start thinking about the calendar, how it currently is for this year, you think, well, there surely must be additional opportunities for making these journeys smaller. I mean, CJ, you were clicking through there. I think they went from China or Japan to Miami, but they've already got 2 other races in the US, in Vegas and in Texas during the course of the year. So are they trying to reduce travel distance, or are they trying to spread out when races are taking place in the US for maximum commercial gain? So there's definitely a conflict angle happening here. And of course, some of the venues are going to be Northern Hemisphere versus Southern Hemisphere. So you've got summer, winter complexities coming in there as well. So it's not probably an easy thing to do, but I think there's still certainly opportunities to reduce and group up some of these Grand Prix at some stage.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the weighting between those, the sustainability goals, the climate in general. When is peak season for F1 events to be there in certain locations? I can imagine, there's events that either precede or post the F1 that they also commercialize as well to some degree. I do notice, small trends, and that you are kind of working, I guess, east to west on some of these across the map. I don't know if that's correct. But I do love about this chart is you do have that active comparison, where have I been, where am I going? And then also, the cumulative total kilometers traveled. So going to your point there, Simon, and it would be interesting to see. Now I don't know F1, but what did that map and season look like a decade ago?
Yeah.
Compared to what does that look like now? I would be very interested to see those two.
And what could it look like if you took all the venues and actually put them in the right order in terms of
just go on proximity?
Yeah, just literally
possible
proximity.
distance.
What's the few? Yeah.
There we are. Any F1 fans? That's your next challenge.
Cool. So the second one I picked is this one by Anastasia. Sorry if I've abused your name. I really like this. It's superbly effective, but there's loads of little touches. The little emojis down the left-hand side, brilliant. The marginal histogram at the top, also excellent. But I just think this is incredibly effective at what it does, which is showing you which sports have been in which games and which other sports were also taking place. And I think the breakdown between when there was a demonstration or an unofficial sport and a main kind of a full sport, I think is really effective as well. So, I mean, you picked out the baseball softball from having looked at this before as being like a particularly interesting story where it's just been in and out of the games for ages, and then it had a bit of a run and then it's out again.
Yeah.
And I just think this is just a really effective way of showing this information, and the colors just make it really nice to look at for me as well.
Is it easy? I'm just having a look here. Is it easy to tell which events have been in it every time? Because there's gaps, isn't it? But the gaps are for the war, aren't they, and things, rather than they weren't in it. So that'd be quite a nice little icon, wouldn't it? I'm guessing rowing,
classics
probably.
like wrestling, weightlifting, rowing. They tend to be the ones that have been. I think maybe even cycling. Athletics, of course.
Yeah, that'd be a nice little icon, wouldn't it? Between maybe the
fencing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's more obvious where there's been multiple years due to war, because you can easily kind of see the gap here. Whereas if it's only one or two, is this gap as prominent going down the page? You could argue it is. I think it just makes it more difficult to recognize based on the rest of the sports that haven't appeared. Yeah, what I love about this is you also have the cumulative number of sports at the games. So have we reached, now it's only a very small story, but have we actually reached like a bit of a peak in terms of like, is 50 a cap now? It seems to be evening out between the 40 and 50 range. I would also love to know, it kind of feels like a bit of hit and miss. So are certain sports introduced in the years where it's in the host games and they think they have a better chance at winning? Like, I'm not going to say it is, but perhaps. And then you have some that will, they'll be one-off. More recently, commercialization. Some of the new sports, are they just more interesting to watch? How does retention, in terms of wanting to go watch these new games, does that impact whether they stay on at future Olympics or not?
It's really interesting, like the politics of that. So there has been a real push from the IOC to get more modern sports included to try and boost viewership amongst younger generations. That's what's been behind kind of all these lifestyle sports, and then the variants of the American sports that will be in LA, like we were talking about flag football, I think six-a-side lacrosse, stuff like that. They're designed to be more consumable, like 3-on-3 basketball, more consumable, faster versions of existing things to appeal to people or nations that don't necessarily play that sport. But yeah, it's really interesting. I had the same thought as you, CJ. Have we reached peak sports? Is this it? Plus or minus a couple from time to time.
I love that you can go through probably row by row each sport, and then you can find probably a mini story within there. Like I've just scrolled down the page. I'm surprised that tennis has a huge chunk missing. For me, I thought that would be an Olympic sport, that covers many years. I love that there's actually kind of a bit of mirroring of these three sports put together, albeit this is just alphabetical. I like the fact that they've been introduced at the same time and they've all been seen 2 years running.
And to your point about the home games, you can see karate there was in Tokyo, wasn't it? And only Tokyo. So that's a solitary dot there.
Yes.
And I wonder how they got on. Probably, I guess, probably did quite well, didn't they? The Japanese in that.
Interesting. Croquet, cricket only shown once. Breaking was new.
Yeah.
Tug of war is the niche hipster reference that a lot of people have. What's the strangest sport that's ever been in the Olympics? Tug of war.
Nice. Great viz.
Cool. And then my final one, and another one of these kind of athlete age at Paris 2024 distributions, but this one from Ryan, just looking at the Olympic medalists. I like the sub breakdown. I particularly like his use of colors here. It makes it really easy to see where the real peaks are very quickly at a glance. That purple really stands out for me against the other colors. And similar to the point that you made earlier, CJ, this is because he's got the same axis in every single multiple. It makes it really easy to look across and just compare them. And there's some really interesting stories for me. So some of these sports obviously have less medals available than other sports. So artistic gymnastics has quite a lot, so you get much more of a distribution. But even within that, in golf, right, there's 6 medalists, 3 men, 3 women. Half of them were the same age. Like, what's that about? How's that happening? You know, like these really very peculiar quirks, which I think are probably related to that, like that Olympic age effect that we talked about earlier. Somehow, you know, they're somehow tied into this kind of wider pattern that's happening. Yeah, so I just really enjoy the look and the feel. And normally I'm a fan of like a lot of white space, and there's a lot of white space on this because of the background, but there's something I really like about the fact that all of the graphs are run together. So there's actually no breaks between the axis. They just restart on the other side of the line, but the line doesn't go all the way up and down the page like it would on a like native kind of Tableau column divider. Again, for me, it just actually encourages me to keep going sideways rather than stop, look at another one, reset, stop, look at another one, reset. So yeah, just lovely design for me.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of that design of the labeling, the axes, how they're grouped together. I also quite like the fact that he has bucketed them up into 3 years. I wonder if there was a bit of an experiment to say, you know, do I do 3 years? Do I do 5 years? Do I just leave it as their actual age? Now I find that because he's done 3 years, dare I say, because there's only a few bars, it kind of makes it easier to interpret in some regard, as opposed to if I had the full scale of every single age between, I don't know, what did we say? It was about 13 or 14 up to 70s, 80s, depending on discipline overall. So this would be a subsection based on the medalists. But I find it easier to interpret the bar chart now. There's actually less bars. I can easily read what those age categories are.
Yeah. Yeah, the golf one's interesting, though, isn't it? So obviously the bucket of 3 years stands a bit of better chance for them getting in the same space. What would be interesting, and it might look a bit too much, is almost have like a sort of a very light grey context shaded area behind just the general population of the athletes. So you get a sense of, is this a peak of age generally, or is it just lucky that the 3 medalists were all at the same age, or actually is the peak of the people playing golf in the late 30s? Because you'd expect it to be a little bit later, wouldn't you, than those medalists there. So yeah, it's again one of these views that inspired exploration and additional questions and finding little stories and patterns.
Yeah, and just to round that off, actually, there's that gap in modern pen again. This weird like generational gap. So admittedly, again, there's only 6 medalists, so we would expect to see a gap somewhere. But the fact that we've already seen in the distribution of athletes that there's this weird gap in the population of people that were competing in 2024, and it's there again in the medalist age distribution still as well.
So you think that's a COVID legacy thing, do you, Mo? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think it's a COVID legacy thing. I think I've got no idea what it is, to be honest. It just seems to be a very strange quirk, which, you know, it's when you're looking at this many gatherings of any distributions, you would expect some of them to look a bit strange to our pattern forming eyes.
And it's been in modern pentathlon's been in the Olympics, hasn't it, recently for a period of time? It's not like one of those that's come in and out, and then people haven't. The people of a certain age haven't done it because they haven't needed to, because it's not been in the Olympics.
You flick back to the previous viz.
Cross reference.
Yeah, no, it has been in the game for ages.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, some amazing Olympic vizzes this time round.
Yeah,
I think. Cool. Simon, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, I think it's been another enjoyable monthly call, CJ. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about how long has it actually been? It wasn't quite a month, but certainly the time's gone quickly. We head off and say goodbye to August, say goodbye to the Olympics, say hello to the football season. So I'm expecting a few more Premier League type visits to come in, maybe a little bit of rugby from some of our regulars as well. That's pretty popular. But yeah, it's incredible to see such a great range of Olympic visualizations, which are probably finishing up now. But yeah, certainly looking forward to seeing a variety of sports going forward into the next few weeks. And we'll be back here, same time, same place, around the beginning of October to discuss September's batch.